today is concerning Islam and disability, and this topic is really has a lot to do with my personal and professional interest, as well as my other colleagues at the presenter today. They're going to present on in that topic. So for personal and professional beliefs that I am when I grew up in Egypt, I had an aunt. She's suffer from autism, and then the family kept her in a basement due to the stigma. So until I grown up, and I figured out that we have an aunt that she's still alive. So this is something personal to me. And then professional, I've been working since 2006 in the field of disability as a practitioner. Even my dissertation about the regarding to the stigma toward people with disability in Arab Americans, included Muslim, of course. Uh, so the overview of this presentation today, the attendees will be learn more about understanding Islam and how Muslims view disability, and also which factors that impacted the view and attitude toward persons with disability. And also we will have the other colleagues that they're going to present about educational strategies to mental health professional, as well as we're going to end with explain disability in the Muslim world in the case of Bangladesh, the country of Bangladesh. Uh, I want to start with the difference between spirituality and religion belief, because as a researcher and as an academic, when I do the lit review, I found a lot of misconceptions and exchange between spirituality and belief, as well as the religion, that a lot of researchers even sometimes talking about spirituality, that meaning religion, and religion is meaning spirituality. So spirituality is more an individual practice that has to do with having a sense of peace and purpose, and also it's all embedded on mind, body, and spirit to elevate it, the body and mind and spirit. Also, the difference, the religion is a specific set of organized beliefs and practices that usually shared by a community and group, like in the Muslim community or Christian community. They go to the mosque, they pray 5 times, and they fasting Ramadan. So these are a religion as well as practice that embedded in that kind of belief. The belief of the worship also of controlling, believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or God, that a superpower, that especially that this particular faith and worship are even connected. So there is a faith in God or Allah, and there is also related to some practices that, as I said, the 5 pillars of Islam that every Muslim that they have to practice. So this is the difference between spirituality and religion. So spirituality is a personal belief and practices, but religion is more of faith and worship that related to each other. Muslim Americans, if we give data about who the Muslim American, how many Muslim American living there, the World Population Review of 2020 estimated about 1.9 billion American Muslim living around the world. In the United States, the Pew Research Center estimated about 3.5 million Muslim American living in the United States. However, there is another research data showing that we have about 7 million Muslim living in the United States. So you can see the number is shifting, and that's why, because there is the shifting by the accurate number. Actually, sometimes I say personally, we don't have an accurate estimation of how many Muslim living in the United States due to the mistrust and suspicions between the Muslim community and also the U.S. authority, especially after 9/11, because many Muslims, they think that the census or even any survey or any study that is spying on Muslim due to the stigma and also the backlash after 9/11. So it's very hard to tell how many Muslims are in the United States, even in the census as well, because many people, they don't want to disclose their identity being Muslim in any survey or any suspicious. And as I said, some of Muslims, not all Muslims, that they do those. Muslims and discrimination. I mean, especially since 9/11, there is and the tragedy of 9/11 has added more of discrimination against Muslims community, and we became target of discrimination at workplace, at housing, uh, in the community, in a daily life. And being a Muslim, and the panelists are here, my colleagues are Muslims, we experience a lot of discrimination in my life. In my last 22 years living in the United States, I experienced in a daily way, a daily life. Even I kind of like use this kind of practices, but I kind of cope with it, going to the mosque and pray, and also reading the Quran. Anti-Muslim hate crime has increased since 9/11. It's in the last, I can say 20 years now. And also, especially, we see like some of the events that happened last week in Colorado, and some of the event that yesterday, even in the capital and the United States Capitol, that can might increase also the hate crime in the upcoming years. The highest levels of backlash against Muslims since 9/11, of course, backlash against Muslims, particularly women wearing a hijab, and this is gonna can trigger more discrimination against that Muslim women, especially if they wear the hijab, because they pretty much is a sign of being Muslim outside, and outside when they go outside in the community, being around the people. Background. So stereotypes and negative attitude toward person with disability exists for a long time. Attitude toward people with disability are different between culture and religion. What does mean different between culture and religion? Mean like I could be Muslim, but I have also a Middle Eastern Arab culture, North African culture. Somebody from Bangladesh have a Southeast Asian culture. And then so every country has a culture, main culture and subculture. So the culture is different than being religious practice and belief as well, because there are two different areas we talk about it. And there is, when we talk about culture and religion, the Muslims are it can be very with their attitude toward people with disability with regard to both things. And then there is a lack of evidence in the literature, evidence-based in the literature about working with Muslim community who are being impacted by disability. So I know there is a lot of research on Muslims, but not particularly toward the disability and the stigma toward people with disability. The lack of, as I said, research, empirical data in that area. Statement of the problem: stigmatization, marginalization of persons with disability in Muslim and Arab culture, a negative societal attitude and stereotypes have added more challenges to the people with disability and added more challenge to their already cognitive and mental condition and development, lack of culture sensitivity in service delivery, and working with Muslim clients, especially for people who are non-Muslim, that they are not really having a cultural sensitivity toward people working with this Muslim community. In the literature, Islam views disability as a challenge set by Allah, and the Quran urging us to treat Muslims with kindness and respect and to protect them. And also, Muslim population in the United States are very heterogeneous, and they are different in their beliefs, their culture, attitude, and also there is some factors that associated with their belief and attitude toward people with disabilities, such as socio-demographic characteristics, level of acculturation, level of contact, and religious belief. Uh, relevance to Muslims, population, Islamic tradition. The Muslim jurist or faqihs in Islam that they view all forms of disability comes from Allah. Everything is existing of Allah control or Allah hand. Also, Muslim philosophers like Sufis saw the suffering as necessary aspect of living, as necessary of evil that must be exist in the world to gain the balance between good and bad, good and evil. Like this make a balance between, Allah sometimes bring people with disability and people without disability. So this is like to bring more balance and between the good and bad and the disability, and also among the people. Good work God work is perfect, as well as there is nothing that he done to be judged, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He created us in a perfect way, included the people with disability. Person with disability are sin-free. Even they don't have to follow these 5 pillars of Islam, and they should go to the heaven or Jannah, inshallah, in afterlife. Muslim living with disability. Disability is widely accepted among all Muslims. Islamic societal culture might be different than the religion. As I said, the culture is different than, and subculture different than the religious belief. Islam as a religion is a quite progressive in terms of its attitude toward people with disability. Family members and members of society maybe hold like a negative attitude toward people with disability due to the stigma, as I said, because they think that there is a bad blood or an evil spirit or bad genes are running in the families. That is why they might have a negative attitude toward people with disability. Islamic teaching implies that all people deserve to be treated equally and with humanity and respect. Hasad or envy and evil eye, which is lead to parents to seek treatment for religion and a spiritual contest. So which is, we believe that the person with disability, he might have got an evil eye or hasad. That's why that he became a disabled. The treatment for person with disability pretty much is 2 main things: physical, medical, like prescriptions and psychotropic medication if someone have a mental health issues, and also spiritual medicine, which is the Muslims go with the people with disability, and even their families, they go and do the charity and also praying at the mosque and reading the Quran in order to heal their disabled loved ones. The clinical, this is my last slide. The clinical implication for the topic, especially for clinical practice, highlight how the Muslim American community attitude toward people with disability. And this is, we would like to increase the contribution to increase understanding about the Muslim culture in general, increase the mental health professional knowledge base about providing empirical data on Muslim Americans and how their attitude toward people with disability enhances the culture competency and skills for mental health practitioners. As I say, more specifically who are non-Muslims, how to deal with the Muslims families and also Muslims with disability. Understanding and strengthens the spirituality beliefs and religious network culture support for people with disability is considered being critical. And now I give the talk to Dr. Khaja, and she can introduce herself and starting her presentation.
Hi, I'm Dr. Khadija Khadra. Tarek, can you move it to my slide?
Yeah, just slide. Can you see it?
I'm below.
Okay, hold on. I share again.
Sorry, guys. Okay, I'll go through this really quick. So, assalamu alaikum. Some of the things needed to address language barriers are, our certified translators, training of everybody, including beginning receptionists, website creators. And what we've also learned is that Muslim women who wear hijabs often people will speak to them as though they don't speak English and talk really loudly or almost yell if they have disabilities. Next slide. So as you all know, most Muslims are fine with opposite sex providers, but some may prefer, so it's important to ask, they may prefer the same sex. And as well, follow the client's lead in interaction. And as you know, some Muslims are comfortable shaking hands, some are not, and modesty in clothing, which you already know. Next slide. So very clear that studies show some Muslims may fear an aspect of service that could conflict with cultural or religious convictions. Legal status could in fact impede interventions, and service providers reaching out ahead of time, making presentations at mosques, Muslims organizations to build more trust about their services and disability, and more Muslim members on advisory boards. And some of the support systems already that we need to support more of our families to avoid caregiver burnout, and utilizing imams and elders and traditional healers, and need more special education teachers in Islamic schools dealing with disabilities. and also more work related to people who are non-Muslim, training them on the issues on the slide. And more outreach between Muslim and non-Muslim communities to build trust, engage networks, and educators, again, to increase recruitment to train Muslims to enter fields of disability work. And improve inclusion policies and developing more culturally appropriate materials. And more research is needed, outcome-based on families who have disabilities in Muslim communities on what their needs are.
Now, my colleague Hasan, he will introduce himself and starting the case of Bangladesh.
So my name is Hasan Reza, and I'm a colleague of Dr. Zidan and Dr. Khaja. And given the context that they talked about, I would love to bring an example from a Muslim majority country, particularly how disability is viewed in the context, as well as like the mental health for disabled people. So I'll just briefly touch on that. So the country is, at light is Bangladesh. It has a huge Muslim population. In fact, the fourth largest Muslim population, and 90% of it are Muslim. And it's a relatively poor country, less than $2,000 GDP. So the disability is prevalent in the country. It ranges from 1.4% to 17.5%. This wide range is because there is not any, reliable data. So most of them are estimates. So among these disabled people, most of them are Muslims. So the highest is like visual impairment, followed by hearing. And really interesting is like almost 14.7% are physical movement difficulties. So that indicates that the complexity that these people go on a daily basis. Women are much more like reported to be disabled because that links with their systematic discrimination that they face. So when it comes to children, it's a growing trend of intellectual disability in the country. For the last 3 decades, there are lots of disabled children are born. In one estimate, it is considered to be that 1 to 10 million kids are disabled. And another estimate tells us like 17 children out of 10,000 are born with autism. So, and this is a really growing trend. We haven't seen that in the past, or probably we could say that at that time we did not have reliable statistics too. So both might be true. So the attitude towards disability, as Dr. Zidan was talking about, that how these religion influence that some of those perception about the disability. That's the perfect example in Bangladesh because it's it's the negative part of the religion that's often being emphasized, and that leads to these like stereotypes. Say if mother, as an example, if mother's blamed for giving birth to disabled children, often she's blamed because it's considered to be a sin committed by the family. And also any of those acts by this disabled person are considered to be the act of a bad gene. Specifically with the children, it has a devastating impact because if children are not allowed to go to social programs, children are not allowed to go close to pregnant women because they think that seeing these kids or disabled kids might like lead to a disabled baby. And a disabled kid always face multiple facets of discrimination and stereotypical belief in their everyday life. And this is particularly true for women with disabilities and girls with disabilities, because in one hand, they are subjected to discrimination. On the other hand, they are also a woman. So there is like double jeopardy in terms of their discrimination status. Parents with children, disabled children are subjected to a lot of parental stress because there is not an infrastructure, there is not a lot of lot of services available. I'll go back go to that in a minute, but that's where it is. How these, how persons with disabilities how they are being dealt in the society. Most often it happens that paternal abandonment. So it left the kids with single mom with low income, and they're supposed to take care of the kids. Violent abuse and violent cure are the most widely used treatment. They're restricted, participations are restricted, and ostracism is so everyday part of their life. So when it comes to that, where this mental health treatment goes, I mean, it's the country has virtually, I can tell that the country doesn't have any mental health infrastructure at all. I mean, until 2018, we were run by like Indian Lunacy Act, which is outdated. And then like, think about the colonial rulers used to follow this policy. So this has been replaced in 2018, but there is still certain provisions are controversial. And it spends $0.08 per capita for mental health services. There are 56 public hospitals have psychiatric outpatient facilities, and virtually none of them works. They don't have, they don't have enough people, they don't have the experts, and so forth. There are 2 hospitals that is running currently, and 17 psychologists are there who do all these services there. And the medical education in the country barely has any inclusion of any form of mental health learning in there. So based on this, you could easily think about what happens to the disabled people, because this stereotypical belief, no existence of services, as well as this wider social acceptance, this to be religious like scene, that's kind of like prevent these people to get access to services or even their notion of service. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you all. And if you have any question, I'm sorry we went so fast and so quick because three presenters in one presentation. So if you have any question, please ask.
Yes, thank you. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat box below. And then inshallah near the end is when we will open the room up for Q&A.
Sure.
And then if the presenters are interested in dropping their emails below, people can also email them directly.
Sure.
So next up, we have Julie Rostina. She is the founder and director of MPAI Foundation. Her commitment to social justice is reflected in her work which provides education, community empowerment, and advocacy for disadvantaged groups like people living with HIV and AIDS. 17 years of experience with international NGOs who work in the field of healthcare, TB, reproductive health, including marital and child health, and HIV and health system, has strengthened as a researcher and professional consultant.
I'm sorry, what her question, like specific question?
So, yep, go ahead. What is your question?
Yeah.
Okay, this is my turn.
Yep, go ahead. It is your turn. You can share your screen if you'd like for your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Akila. Let me introduce myself. My name is Julie Rostina. I am an advocate and also advocate and a community educator in my community. I would like to present my program intervention in my foundation since 2019 until present. Okay. Okay. We already work for the HIV/AIDS is almost 17 years. Yeah, and I'm really focused on people with HIV/AIDS, and today I would like to present emergency calling for strengthening psychological aspect among people living with HIV/AIDS as a case of from Indonesia. I work with also Zia Martinis as a psychologist. Okay. Okay. First is people living with HIV/AIDS face multiply mental illness. Okay. Because it's the most stigmatized among the population of this disease. And then the psychological intervention can decouple a quality of life as well as support HIV treatment. The evidence show that the mental disorder and HIV have a great association, vice versa. And but in fact, okay, for more than 17 years, I work in HIV issue. There is less mental program specifically for people living with HIV/AIDS in Indonesia. And last year, we have like a forum. We call it family festival. Is we invited several speakers, including the director of the Ministry of Health, to explore what is the mental health program specifically for people with HIV. Okay, as we know, mental health is a state of well-being in which the individual they realize his or her own ability. It include the strength and talents, and then they can cope with the normal stresses of life and can work productively and fruitfully, and is it able to make a contribution, yeah, to his or her communities. That's on the WHO. Integrated programs are needed to empower people living with AIDS for copying the stress, because their life is like a roller coaster. If I ask them about their life, so it is will also face more distress among them. And why we work this issue for them, because health is essential condition for the condition to the protection of life, and as also a principal requirement for the establishment of God law. And Islam plays health as a second in important of faith. Our Prophet Muhammad says, "A second to faith, no one has ever been given a greater blessing than health." And also, we aware that the right to health assigns responsibility, that your body has a right over you. Is Hadith Bukhari. And as we know, human needs not only the physical aspect, but also the mental requirement. And mental aspect can somehow affect on body, but also directly to the soul of man. Yeah. And Islam highlights the importance of health and urges people to gain a healthy state. As the mention of Hadith Muslim, the strong believer is more beloved to Allah than the weak believer. And we also recognize people living with HIV has not only a problem physical side, but also in a mental side due to highly stigma and discrimination among them in community, which lead to distress, anxiety, and the others of mental health. Unfortunately, little is being done by the public health system, majority of nations, to tackle this illness. Yeah, we also confirmed to the Ministry of Health about the program. What is the specific program for the people with AIDS? But there is no specific program for them. And intervention of psychological aspect can recover a quality of life as well as the support HIV treatment. So uh, if you treat mental health, it also will impact to the physical body and also HIV treatment. Okay, but the less information is gained about the specifically program that provide mental program, especially for the people with age. They has the equal rights to access healthy states, including in psychological feature. So its integrated program are needed to empower them for coping distress and to increase their psychological aspect. Okay, this is our program intervention since 2019. The first method, our method is we doing pre-intervention. First, we carry out need assessment of mental health program by qualitative methods. Yeah, we explore what is the specific needs in mental health or psychological and spiritual. And then we also doing this review on mental health policy and support in Indonesia, including peer support curriculum. And after that, we doing mini workshop on psychological and spiritual support. We invited to speaker or guest star among them. Okay. At the same time, I introduced one of the ustazah, yeah, cleric. I would like to just like test the water, whether they comfort with the ustazah, because if the ustazah make them more comfortable, we will continue the program. Okay. And then after the assessment, we are made some intervention, yeah, mental health. We need 1 year to make a program specific for them after the introduce the ustazah and also our psychologist. And we give the target with the workshop. We call the amending wounds of parenting. Yeah, it is parenting is not only the theory, but also there is a practice to self-therapy, to the past experience, either child maladaptive. And then we are doing anger management because most of them are have uh, anger issue, yeah, so they have to control it. And because the mental health is also knowing their self, yeah, is based on the definition. So we provide a workshop that lead them to know and be yourself, and they know the potential, their strength and also the talents. Okay, and then we are doing regular spiritual support meeting guided by Ustazah that we invited 1 year before, and after that we are doing evaluation whether they are still comfort with our methods and also program. But there is a limitation of our intervention, but the program only cover people living with AIDS who join a peer support group in Depok City, yeah, in West Java provinces, and also a member of Positive Woman Indonesia. Yeah, this is like still a pilot. Yeah, we have the small coverage, but we will evaluate whether this program is good and should to continue. Okay. Our conclusion is no specific program of mental assistance for people living as HIV/AIDS given, and then almost all, okay, almost all people mentioned, yeah, during the first month they get like the status, positive status, there is a critical moment in mental health problem. They mentioned there is without any support in mental health problem. So they, in 6 months, they experience with like as I mentioned, is it like a roller coaster? Is it from like high to down, yeah, to down situation? Is it like stressful, yeah? And mostly our target describe the psychological issue and an aspect, and spiritual program is an urgent. Yeah. So they have to, they want to access the program. And we also confirm to the peer support, yeah, because in Indonesia we have KDS, kelompok dampingan sebaya, or we call peer support group for people living with HIV, and we found they do not have a standard curriculum for what doing in the group. The peer also without no support training, especially in mental health. Okay. Most our beneficiaries, yeah, had inner child maladaptive with the parents of caregiver is proved by PTSD score, post-trauma stress disorder, and mostly most of them need emotional control technique. So we provide anger management. And then we found also the almost all had low self-worth, and even that they had a talent and strength. So when we are give the talents mapping workshop, they just realize, oh, I have strength, I have a talent. Oh, and we also give feedback. They ask, we ask them to do talent test, yeah, and I because I also talent mapping practitioner, so I review and feedback to them about the strength of them, and they realize, oh, yes, oh, I get, I have a strength and potential, yeah, yeah, and then also when we are doing evaluation about our program, our target was satisfied with the program intervention that we provided and asked to continue the program. And sorry, okay. Okay. As the last recommendation, yeah, or implication of our practice is intervention of the psychological dimension in Indonesia is a calling an emergency needs. Yeah, there is no program at all specifically for them, psychological for them. And then the program is should be created in specific setting and group because the there are various group of the people living with HIV/AIDS is because the LGBT woman household or people with drug user problem. Yeah, drug user. And we also need more ustadja cleric who concerned with the issue of HIV/AIDS in various settings with no stigmatized and also discrimination. So, and the last is human resources for psychological support should be improved, collaborated with association of psychologists. Okay, thank you. Okay, this is my further contact. Thank you very much. Okay, that's all from my.
Thank you so much. Are you able to stop sharing your screen? I think there should be a stop sharing little box up in the top right corner. There you go. So we've got one more presentation. Let me just pull them up here.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. This presentation is from myself and Dr. Tahirah Abdullah. We're both joining you virtually from Boston. It seems like, the previous presentations and ours might have some overlaps, but not fully so. We'll try to incorporate some of what you've mentioned already. So just to highlight, we're both clinical psychologists, and we provide services on an individual basis as well as within the community. So we'll be building on some of that to share our approaches in regards to how one moves from healing to liberation, like we'll share theoretical and practical approaches along those lines. Okay, so just to give you, so to give you an overall view of what we'll be covering in these 15 minutes as quickly as we can, would be notions of healing. So if somebody is not doing well psychologically, right, what does healing look like on an individual level as well as on a communal level, contextually? And the idea that one needs to do both for full healing to take place. And then we'll be talking about liberation psychology and restorative justice. And then we'll be sharing models for individual healing that take the context into account. So if somebody is going through a psychologically challenging time period, like how do you work with them individually, but how do you also take into the context into account that contributes to their illnesses at times? And what are the communal models of healing that also take the individual into account? And then we'll be reviewing some Islamic principles that capture these models. And then we'll try to give you a couple of examples of how to conduct this work. So overall, we'll be covering some theory and some models, and then giving you examples of how to do this work. Okay.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Khan. So as psychologists, healing and wellness obviously are the focus of our work, especially as clinical psychologists. And whether that's through our clinical practice or our advocacy, our research, and so forth. And so often when psychologists are talking about healing or when they're talking about wellness, they're talking about it on an individual level. However, given our own life experiences and our backgrounds and our own intersecting positionalities and our educational and work experiences, we have really seen what Frantz Fanon, what Ignacio Martin Baró, and what others have written about. And that is that to fully heal, we must really address both the individual and the societal contextual components of an issue, like Dr. Khan mentioned a bit earlier. And part of this involves acknowledging and understanding and resisting those oppressive isms that are impacting well-being. And that includes racism, capitalism, Islamophobia, colonialism, imperialism, and so forth. And so striving for liberation from oppression, which includes all of these things, is necessary, but it's often a neglected part of healing. And so another way to think about this is in the context of coping and healing. Coping consists of efforts to manage the demands of stressful situations. Oftentimes coping is reactive, so it's a response to something that's happened, and it involves ways to emotionally manage a situation, although there also are more active forms of coping too. Coping is oftentimes necessary in order for there to be healing, but coping alone can almost be like putting a Band-Aid over a splinter. So it feels better in the moment. It might even feel better for a long time, but it's not until we actually remove the splinter that we can fully heal. So it's not until we uproot the oppressive isms that are maintaining or that result in a recurrence of issues that we can fully heal from that. And so drawing on the radical healing framework developed by Brianna French and her colleagues suggests that particularly for people of color in the US, psychological healing has to move beyond those traditional notions of psychotherapy that have historically focused on the individual behaviors or individual thoughts or individual emotions. And for liberation to occur, healing needs to focus on the systemic pieces that are contributing to the trauma associated with racism or colonization. And so the radical healing process acknowledges the pain of oppression while also fostering hope for justice. And it includes these 5 components that are listed here: critical consciousness, radical hope and envisioning possibilities, strength and resistance, cultural authenticity and self-knowledge, and collectivism. And those things really tie in nicely with liberation psychology, which aims to actively understand the psychology of oppressed and impoverished communities by conceptually and practically addressing the oppressive sociopolitical structure in which they exist. And in an article by Sobia Ali Faisal, she writes about the essential tasks of Islamic anti-patriarchal liberation. And those tasks, some of them overlap with the radical healing framework on the previous slide, and they include privileging Muslim voices, which involves creating space for Muslims to share their knowledge and applying Muslims' knowledge to understanding the lived experiences of Muslims and addressing issues that are of importance, as opposed to drawing on the dominant society's narratives of what the issues are in Muslim communities and how we should best be addressing those issues. So really looking internally to what Muslims are saying about what is going on with Muslims and what Muslims are saying about how best to address those things. The second task is challenging internalized colonialism. So challenging the ways that we as Muslims may have internalized colonial ideology or have internalized Islamophobia. And this internalization can, for some, result in fear about expressing one's faith. It can make it difficult to feel empowered by the dignity and the worth that's associated with Islam or associated with being Muslim. And so resisting this internalization of society's views of what it means to be Muslim can be important. And the last task is recovering historical memory. And that's related to the cultural authenticity and self-knowledge piece that goes along with the radical healing framework. So having a refocusing on the Muslim scholarship that is out there, and that can inform the work that we're doing.
So picking up on what Dr. Abdullah just said, so restorative justice, how do we think of it? It's an approach to justice in which one of the responses to crime is to organize a meeting between the victim and the offender, sometimes the representatives of the wider community. And I mean, this is shifted from the retributive justice idea, right? And where the theory is that of punishment. If somebody commits a crime, when there's an offender and they break a law, justice requires that they suffer in return, right? And the response to a crime is proportional to the offense. So the shift is from that to actually focusing on the victim as well, and thinking about what made them commit this crime, perhaps, or is there a way of resolving it that is not necessarily related to punishment in the criminal law system, but in a different way, sort of attributing and covering for what they had committed. So there's a way, and I think it very well aligns with Islamic Sharia forgiveness. And the idea of forgiving if one can be forgiven and if the one feels it in their heart to be able to do so. So the focus becomes much less on why did this, this is a crime that this person committed and they need to be punished, to why did this person commit this crime? What happened? Is there a way that our society or our system attributes to this individual's inability in some way that made them commit the crime? Are the systems or the isms contributing to this individual then committing this crime? So if we take the communal and contextual aspect into account, we can move easily from the retributive justice system to the restorative justice system, which aligns with the notion of forgiveness within Islam. So there are, mediation and arbitration sort of measures that are often in place, and there's several of these that are already, in place historically that have been applied in different settings. And I'll go a little bit more into detail with those in a later slide. But there are the notions of jirga, sulu, diwan, and hizmet. So these are built-in mechanisms in which which are akin to the restorative justice idea, where the community is involved rather than the offender and the victim, the law system, so to speak, the criminal system, so to speak. So we'll highlight those for you next.
Right, so we wanted to just briefly give some overviews of a couple of different frameworks that we have found useful in some of our work. And so the first one is called the addressing framework. I also add an extra R to this framework to make sure that we capture race and ethnicity separately, because they are different from each other and distinct. But this framework I found useful as a way of being able to think about my own positionality as I'm entering the work that I'm doing with a client, as well as a client's positionality, and thinking about all the different kinds of isms that might be impacting them and the ways that those things might intersect or overlap for them. And so this is a framework that I've used. You can see that it gets at a variety of social identities, social locations that might be influencing the experiences that a person is having and can be useful in individual clinical work.
So here's another model. We're just giving you the individual models right now that take in the communal aspect into account. So this is another model. It's a respectful model. It's a relational model. It's about a therapist or individual working together and looking at the dimensions of power as they relate to religion or spirituality, economics, social, any aspect of identity, really, including the family background and history, language, location of residence, because there are dynamics of power at play between clinicians and patients, and just I think it's important to recognize those and recognize that the communal aspect comes into play with each individual, and it's not just concrete clinical work. It is clinical in nature, but the fact that people's identities matter and how they intersect matters. So taking that into account is important. Both of these models that we mentioned, you can easily Google them online, and it goes more in detail of how to utilize them. We just wanted to highlight them for you.
Thank you. And so this model comes from APA's most recent multicultural guidelines from 2017. This is the layered ecological model of the multicultural guidelines. And this model is really complex because these interactions are really complex. As you'll see, there are 5 different levels in this model. And on the outside of the model, it includes power and privilege, it includes human rights, it includes all of these various contextual factors, international and domestic climate, the tensions and fluidity that can exist among these. And for me, one of the things that this model really helps to put in perspective or to keep in perspective is that the interaction between a client and a therapist, even if it's in individual therapy, doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen outside of the context of the community that each person who's involved in that therapeutic relationship comes from. It doesn't happen outside of the context of whatever the international and domestic politics and sociopolitical climate is. It doesn't happen outside of the context of the workplace, the neighborhood, the family, the community. All of those things have an impact and have an influence. Power and privilege obviously has an impact, has an influence on the work that you're doing in the room. And so this is an in-the-room model, and it can also be applied to community work. And I think that that will come out a lot as we talk about the examples that we have a little bit later.
So this looks like a little bit of a loaded slide, but I wanted to highlight some of the systems that are already in place. We were talking about the restorative justice aspect, right? So these are notions that are applied within different countries already. Like, I come from Pakistan originally, and the system Jirga is a very familiar one there. It's an informal justice system. It's a gathering of elders convened by an intermediary to hear grievances between contesting parties and reach decisions by consensus. This has been central to governance and justice provision for several hundred years. The formal justice system is often disregarded because it's lengthy, costly, and at times corrupt, and has been unable to gain credibility. The Jirga members are chosen in line with their age and place in the community. So I've seen that in action in a village within Pakistan of how these decisions are made. Because if you go to the criminal justice system for criminal acts that are at least the ones that are minor ones for sure, the process can be so long and lengthy and costly, and people often don't have those options. So communities have made these jirga systems, where the elders who are sort of more wise, so to speak, gather, and they make the decisions around that. And people sort of comply with those decisions and refrain from using the criminal system, justice system. Anyway, so I mean, there's a critique of some of these jirgas, more so in the realm of the fact that it's often doesn't take gender into account, that most of these jirga members end up being men. Nonetheless, there's a system in place, and I think it's important to recognize and the fact that the systems have worked for, these have worked for hundreds of years is it speaks to the fact that there's something to be gained from this. This is very common in Pakistan and Afghanistan. I'm sure it's it's an operation in other places as well. The other one is that of Hizmet, which is very much applicable in Turkey. Sort of a global movement, and the idea is being dedicated to human service. So it was Sufi Muslim mystic and scholar who started this, and is focused on education, business, interfaith dialogue. So any sort of a thing that's happening on a community level, whether it's related to the business operations, educational system, or interfaith sort of conversation or science, there's a way in which one can resolve conflicts by promoting tolerance and understanding each other, right? And one of the tenets of this is that, that one can hold profound beliefs and commit spiritually inspired acts of service without discriminating against or alienating people of other faiths. So although Sufism is often about, it's based in Islam to a great extent, but the idea is here that there's a way in which you can engage with your human selves and be contributing and servicing the community that where issues or conflicts can be resolved. And that's not discriminatory and disregarding of other aspects of faith. Then there's Divan, which is very much applicable. I know it started in India, but it's very much applicable in Iraq and Nepal as well. Who is head of the state institution who ensures justice. They're Divans that belong to, so to speak, elite families in the history of the Mughal and post-Mughal India, and held high posts with the government. So, and Iraq in particular has a much more sort of a complex and structural system of varying kind of divans who work towards maintaining justice within the community. So they could be chancellery, they could be financial, they could be military divans. There are multiple kinds of divans that one can go to who help resolve some of these conflicts that refrain from utilizing the system, so to speak. Obviously, it's not to say that the justice system, the criminal system, whatnot, is not to be utilized, of course, but if there's a way of managing and restoring and sort of making the community feel whole and resolving the issue, this is another way. And divans are, they were known to be the jirgas were much more the elders and the wise one. The divans seem to be more sort of the families who are known in the community or are able to sometimes provide the means, the financial means often. So they're involved. And I think all of this, is based on this notion of suluk, which means literally, peace and reconciliation. It preaches the virtue of conflict resolution, methanol, suluk. So it's pacification. So according to Islam, promoting reconciliation is an act of goodness, and people are encouraged to resolve their differences this way, right? So if Islam says that if you have a conflict with another person, you should first attempt to resolve it with that other individual, right? And if you cannot do it directly with that individual, then some other mediator, arbitrator, or negotiator could step in. And this could be resolved in a more amicable way. So customarily, Nigerian elders, so it's in Nigeria, this is much more prevalent. They have a suluk system, and it's based on the idea of reconciliation and meditation within the family, community, and society. So they use this proverb Yoruba. It's a custom, really, and there are multiple kinds within that, which simply means the presence of elders. And they attempt to prevent any turbulent or catastrophic situations within the households. So it's the idea of getting people together from within the community to resolve the issues and dilemmas in a way that that is healing for the community or the person who's victim and the person who's the oppressor or the offender at the same time. It keeps the community together. There's a collectivism surrounding that. And I think these are very meaningful sort of, sort of measures that are at place, that are operational already, and we can learn a lot from them. So we just wanted to highlight those for you.
Yes, thank you. And kind of lastly, we want to wrap up with some practical approaches and case examples. And so I'll start by talking about an individual therapy kind of example, and Dr. Khan will talk about more community-based example. And so to start with an individual therapy example, in some of my work with clients who are Muslim, my experiences have been, for me, the people that I've worked with who have been Muslim have mostly been immigrants or children of immigrants. And so it's really important for me to position myself to share ways that my identities are similar and dissimilar as someone who is African-American, who was born and raised Muslim, and is also the daughter of people who converted or reverted to Islam before I was born. And sometimes the work that we've done has been related to discrimination or related to microaggressions that the client has experienced at school or in other settings, and the distress that's associated with those experiences, and really trying to understand those experiences. And part of that understanding really involves drawing on a broader understanding of those societal isms, right? It's hard to understand your experience of discrimination, your experience of racism, your experience of Islamophobia without being able to have an understanding of the broader systems and structures that uphold or that maintain that. And so some of the work is related to some of that critical consciousness piece of things. In addition to making sure that they're not internalizing those experiences or internalizing a negative meaning based on those experiences. Some of the work has also been related to experiences related to identity and not belonging, or related to family conflict due to merging of cultures or merging of identities. And so in that work, I'm always looking, of course, at the individual level processes, but also at the interpersonal and the societal pieces of things too. So, for example, making sure to understand when conflict isn't just about the family, but also is about society, or ways that society's norms are interacting with those family relationships. Similarly, with contextualizing those feelings of not belonging that people might experience, of course, validating those, but also situating it when it's appropriate as not being something that's a deficiency that the client has, but as an issue that's related to the way that society often marginalizes or ostracizes people of color, Muslims, immigrants. And so, again, working through how to resist internalizing those negative and those harmful narratives that society perpetuates, and how to still maintain a sense of hope and a solid sense of self, even in the context of those experiences of marginalization or those feelings of not belongingness. Oh, no. Sorry about that.
Okay, so I was thinking of multiple examples that were coming to my mind in regards to what we could, where I've thought of how to utilize the community in terms of the individual's healing. So a lot of my work is disaster relief work. So I travel to different places to provide disaster relief services within community settings. And I think one of the key points, learning points for me, has been to recognize that there's so much that the communities are already doing or engaging their own ways of healing and maintaining resilience, that we, those of us who go from the West are, have to be sort of cautious about imposing our own judgment onto that, and in bringing our Western, Eurocentric sort of clinical frameworks onto these settings, and learning to utilize the settings that are on ground and incorporating that with our clinical work. I'll share one or two examples quickly. I know we're short of time, but so some of my work has been working within the refugee camps and Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh. As most of you may know, that it's one of the largest refugee groups in the nation in the world at this point, 1.2 million individuals. That were before the crisis took place, where people transitioned to Bangladesh, but it has been growing since that. And I spent a couple of weeks there, and most of I'll refrain from going into more details, but some of the work that I was doing was focused on working with women who were raped and were pregnant from rape. So conducting groups for them. What I learned pretty quickly, was that, yes, I can apply my individual framework, clinical frameworks, and helping them heal through their trauma and PTSD and depression and whatnot. Yes, I would be utilizing that, but how I needed to incorporate a way of them working together as a community, because that experience of all of these women who were raped, so many, it's amazing. 80% of the individuals were victims have been women or children, and how many women were actually pregnant from rape, and the shame and all that came with it, and how the community then witnesses these individuals, and how that needed to change. And if all these women were together in one space sharing it, it's created a sense of community that we're not alone in it, and learn from each other that they were victimized, and what they needed to do to move forward with this. Imagine carrying a child, that's there from the rape, and how you relate to your own body, and getting them to sort of almost not forgive, but like sort of talk about how this had happened, and maybe think of their ways of healing. What would be healing? Would it be helpful to let go and forgive? Forgiving a crime like that is really, really challenging, but it was less about forgiveness, but more about like how they could share in this pain together, and hearing each other's narratives was helpful. But the other important part was akin to the idea of a jirga. What the community members within these camps had done was figure out a way together to support these women. And whether it was through financial means or other ways, and making sure that they were incorporated into their families and their biases of all sorts, that things that people project onto many of these women, and to how to lessen the shame surrounding that. So Hafiza, it was a jirga-like system, where an elderly woman who was Hafiza was sort of responsible for ensuring the well-being of these women. And how that was carried forth in conversations with families if it needed to be. And the jirga would sit together informally within these camps to sort of talk about what needs were there, what needs were not there. It was not like the formal jirgas, but it was sort of operational in the same way. And it was just beautiful to see how the community came together to do that work, and how it could facilitate the individual work, recognize the community aspect of it, and vice versa. I think I'm going to sort of refrain from sharing more examples and sort of move on so we can all engage in the Q&A. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for your presentations. We've got some questions here, so let me just pin the panelists so I can make sure they're spotlit. Alrighty, I think I got everyone. So we've got a question here. Well, actually, first, let me open with Dr. Abbasi's question. I think this is relevant to everybody really in the work you guys are doing. She says she has a question regarding self-care and the preventing of burnout. And so I would like to open that up to the whole panel of what does everybody do for their own self-care and to avoid burnout, especially after Dr. Khan's wrapping up of such heavy topic, right? Like what do we do while we're in the industry to avoid that burnout? Go ahead, Dr. Zidan. I think you have your unmuted.
Sure. Let me talk about two sections here, like how the mental health professionals and practitioners, social workers, all the people work in the field, how they avoid like a burnout, and how they taking care of themselves. I mean, when we talk about the presentation that we present with my other colleagues from IU, there is an educational section that by providing training for practitioners, Muslims or non-Muslim, and more particularly about non-Muslim as well, like how they can be culturally competent and also sensitive to a different cultures of their own clients, like Muslims or non-Muslims, like even the people based on the color, skin color, or race and ethnicity, like African American, Latinos, American Indian, and so on. So that's something you can heal and help with reducing the burnout and increasing the self-care. So when you are a practitioner and you work with a client and you understand what the background of this client and culturally aware about the sensitive issues dealing with these clients, that's what reduce, of course, the burnout and also will increase the competency skills that you will feel confident and also in dealing with this client as well as the client himself or herself. They will feel confident as well and trusting to you based on you are culturally aware about the differences and you are actually moving from your own culture. It's like cultural humiliation. Like you are pretty much a step away from your own belief, your own culture, and you get into the culture of that person, the client, and you understand fully what's going on. Because when we hear from the non-Muslim practitioners, when they deal with the Muslim clients, they get like shocked with the difference, like Muslim men and women, because the women, they don't want to meet the clinician by themselves alone without present of a Muslim male, like her husband or spouse or brother. So they kind of like, they get a shock with the different about the culture conflict and the things, especially living in a mainstream Western culture in the United States. For with regard to us as practitioner, I'm an academic, but I remember when I used to work in the field of disability in Colorado for many years. It's a kind of like it's a burnout. I mean, I feel every day having a 50 caseload. I go back home and it's like we call it sometimes a secondary PTSD. You know, like the social worker or the practitioner will get uh, overwhelmed with all these kind of issues that they hear every day from the client, and they get like really get into their own mental health issues as well. So I feel like I think it's healing through the religion, like spirituality and religion, like going to the mosque, reading the Quran for me, practice Islam in a way with keeping the 5 pillars, as well as when we've done the research, we found that like religious beliefs and sticking with the practice as Muslims is more is like a protective factor for being like being as a Muslim with your well-being and mental health. So it will protect you from being depressed or even having a panic attack or an anxiety, especially if you are a woman and wearing a hijab and you're facing discrimination in the community, or even being a male with long beard and being Muslim. So all these things, though, so we found that the spirituality belief and Muslim practices are more of being a protective factor to heal these things and coping skill in order to overcome any issues like burnout and increase more of self-care.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'd love to hear from the rest of the panelists if you guys have any thoughts. And then inshallah, we will wrap up for the closing ceremony. Feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead.
Sure, I'll just quickly say, for other people who might not find that this is their strong suit, that if I'm being perfectly honest, this is probably the area that I need to work on most in my professional life. And some of the things that I've tried to do to work on it, that I'm consistently trying to do to work on this. So for one, my primary job is that I am a professor. I have a research team, and one of the things that I do with my research team is a self-care check-in. And creating self-care goals alongside our research goals. And so there's a little bit of accountability that's built in so that when we're checking in about, did you do this research thing that you were supposed to do, or this writing thing that you were supposed to do, we're also checking in about, did you care for yourself the way that you were supposed to care for yourself over the past week too, in line with the goal that you had set for yourself. And so working to raise the priority level of self-care for myself and for my students has been a part of the work that I do in terms of trying to increase the level of self-care. Specific things that I try to do, I try to be active. I bought a cheap exercise bike that I try to get on because it's something that I can do any time of the day and from home. I try to create separation between the work that I am doing and my home life, which has gotten much harder with the pandemic, but that's something that I find to be useful. I'm in a Fitbit challenge with my family. And so I'm competitive. I like to win. So that means that I have to get up and walk between the sessions that I have with clients. And so I try to incorporate little things here and there that help me to care for myself physically, which for me is helpful also emotionally and mentally.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What about the other three?
So I must admit that when I hear self-care, I end up often having a reaction because I feel like it's such a Western-based phenomena as well. Self-care for me is tied to a collective care, sort of like I don't know how to separate the self often from the rest, because I think the focus on the individual is harder for some culturally, and then I think particularly, self-care and the notion of that for women, people of color is different. I think the burden placed on some groups is more so than others, and the self-care aspect is sort of, for me, taking care of the others is related to my own self-care. Can you hear me? Okay, I wasn't sure if you could hear me, but yeah. So I think I just have somewhat of a reaction to that in general whenever that topic comes up. But nonetheless, we all engage in things that we do for ourselves that are helpful. I know that I have the tendency to continue doing more and more, and I have to sort of have limitations around that, especially conducting disaster and crisis relief work. It can add up. So I have a measure that's created, often used for clinicians to be able to assess. Sometimes we don't know that we're burning out. It's hard to tell. We're so used to doing so much that how do you know when it's too much? So this is professional quality of life survey. It's called a ProQual. So I often take that every 3 months or before I'm going on some sort of a mission, and after that. It gives me a good sense of whether I'm overwhelmed or not, and it gives you compassion fatigue score, burnout score, and all of that. Sometimes it's helpful to just see a score measure to be able to know how you're doing. And then activities that I engage in are varying. I think part of that is about my faith and being able to engage in prayer and I think that's meaningful. And then the other activities, I love doing artworks. I engage in that. And all through the pandemic, I've been making this painting, and so there's a way in which we all have our own individual things that we do. But those are my thoughts. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'd love to hear from the other two panelists, but if everybody's kind of shared what you were going to say, I completely understand.
I just when I add to that, I fully agree with our panelists and presenters on that. There is this notion of not paying attention to self-care until we are exhausted. And that sense of exhaustion, I would say, comes when it's already taken over certain things. So, and also this cultural part is also important. I think Dr. Khan mentioned about that I'm sort of invincible. That notion ingrained into each of us as individually, and that's perceive the way we interpret that as if like it's not going to touch me. And I think this idea of self-care is so individualized because psychologists could do a way better explanation of that. But like things that work for certain people might not work for other people, and it just like every individual needs to be pay attention to that, how they are going to just burn out. Say one example that I myself is a researcher primarily, so I'm not a practitioner, but I recently I did with vulnerable children. My studies are so I listened to a really horrible story of 2 years back from a research project in Bangladesh, where a young girl was sharing her rape incident with by police. So the police raped her, and then the story. So it just, the moment I heard the story, the secondary trauma just like hit me so hard that I had to go to a counselor to talk about it and so forth. So before that, I never thought that I will be like hit by simple research question or like a simple story. So at that moment, I felt like, oh my God, it's so real. It needs to be addressed. So it depends, again, going back to the earlier point, that it depends on individual practitioners and how they handle that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate everybody's individualistic approach. I think, yeah, self-care can be phenomenalized for sure. So we are just going to transition right into the closing ceremony. I know my co-organizers wanted me to close it out and then open it again, but I figured we'll just keep it open and continue the conversation because I think it was an important one. So I'm just going to let everybody in, and then inshallah our board members will close us out for another year. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, assalamu alaikum. It's 4:45. Farha, you want to do the honors?